Welcome to the Adaptivity Podcast. My name is Alexei Kravitsky and I'm your host. In this podcast series, we're going to meet thought leaders and practitioners from the field to learn more about adaptivity. And then we're going to go deep into specific practices that you can use in your organization, in your department, in your team to strive for a state of higher adaptivity. Stay with us. All right, welcome everybody to the Adaptivity Podcast. And today with us as a special guest is Jurgen De Smet. Yay! Yes. So it's not the first Adaptivity Podcast that we are running, and we had several guests already who have elaborated on some pretty advanced and interesting topics. For example, from Bas Vodi, we've studied and learned how teams can collaborate together, how to minimize bad dependencies and increase shared work. Yes, from Ahmad Fahmi, we discussed how to deploy management to Gemba and how to make sure management really understand what happens. With Cesario Ramos, we have discussed how to define a broad product group and how to launch a product group. So let's assume those topics are clear and understood, at least hypothetically, right? A big topic, Jurgen, that is still on the minds of a lot of people, and people, I think, have lots of different and maybe confusing ideas, is how you actually manage requirements in the most agile and adaptive way. So let's keep it as an overarching topic for our discussion today, requirement management, if you like that word requirement at all, and maybe this will be also part of our discussion later. But before we dive into that topic, I ask all the guests on the podcast to help us define adaptivity. Well, because it is an adaptivity podcast, I have to ask this question. So how do you define adaptivity?
I would define adaptivity as the ability to switch on a strategical level from one solution or one problem domain to another without having huge switching costs in place. So we don't need to reorganize our complete organization completely again. I think this would be interesting, as well as rapid feedback. Rapid feedback on all levels, and not just on a test, but really on market statistics and usage statistics and things like that. So my preferred way to have sprint reviews, for example, not necessarily using the product, but evaluating and investigating statistical trends that are business relevant. This would be amazing.
Mm-hmm. And do you think all organization, does each organization need this thing, or can you go without it?
It's a tough question. So I'm thinking now. So my initial response would be, yeah, of course, everybody needs it. As software is eating the world, AI is eating the world, data is eating the world, and that kind of things. And so we need to be able to adjust and evaluate and become more data-driven. And as long as we are not fast on the market with experiments, we cannot be data-driven, and it's political-driven in an organization. So that's something I think. Then again, there are organizations out there that, I would say, for example, just run a factory, repetitive work all over the time. I think that's where agility doesn't fit necessarily, and adaptivity doesn't necessarily fit. So I think it fits where there's a high need of learning along the way, or a high need of discovery. Does it make sense to you, Alexei?
Yes, it does make sense. And I think you have highlighted a new dimension of adaptivity that our previous guests haven't mentioned, this feedback and data-driven thing, because eventually, as you said, being adaptive is to be able to change your strategy, right? And to be able to do that, you need some facts, you need some data, you need some feedback. And in order to get that, you need to build this in. So I think, being data-driven, not, as you said, politically driven, is an important part of this adaptivity. So thank you for that fresh view on the adaptivity. We keep expanding and exploring that definition. And I have to ask this question, right? Because while people who see your banners on LinkedIn and social networks, and people who follow you and watch your nice YouTube videos, they know that you call yourself a simplification officer, even a chief simplification officer. So I guess I have to ask at this point, what does that title actually mean?
The meaning of the title is what it says. So it's always looking for simplification. And if we look for simplification, we look in basically in 4 domains. So 2 are very obvious to people. So the vertical domain, so all the layers of management in the requirements management, or also general management. So that's the vertical complexity that we want to reduce, simplify. So then the horizontal complexity. So the amount of different roles and narrow specification and things like that, which we also want to consolidate in simpler structure. So this is commonly known to many people out there. And then we add 2 more complexities to that spectrum. The one is the technical complexity. So also reducing the technical complexity by decent architecture, clean code, and let's say DevOps and coding practices, extreme programming. That will help tremendously. And then the 4th one, but not the least one actually, even though we called ourselves simplification officer before COVID, but since COVID it's become more apparent, and that's the spatial complexity. Removing the complexity of different locations, different sites, different floors, different countries, this kind of stuff. This is the simplification officer, addressing those 4 complexities and reducing what we call the corporate obesity index, or the bureaucracy mass index, whatever you prefer.
I like both of them. And because you've mentioned that simplification, I assume, and I would like you to validate my assumption, please, if that has anything to do with adaptivity, how simplification is linked. Is there any relationship between simplification and adaptivity?
I think there's a very direct link. If you look at the vertical and horizontal complexity, reducing that will lower the switching cost and lower transaction cost in that context. So that's helpful in getting faster feedback and being able to adjust on larger aspects of the strategy, not the small things. So, and the technical excellence is a key enabler in that, I would say.
So you are saying that basically, in order to become more adaptive, you need to simplify the way you are organized. Can we simplify it to that definition? Or?
That would be amazing.
That would be amazing. All right, thanks. And so let's dive into the topic of the podcast, which is requirement management, or maybe we'll find some better wording to define that problem. So I guess the question is how you manage requirements in a most adaptive and in the simplest way possible. And I know that we had many exchanges with you on the topic of going from projects to products, right? Going from epics to real incremental development. So, I mean, we know from our previous podcast guests that you need to do many changes. Well, let's assume you know your customers, you have been able to form a product group which has been launched, and everybody is happy and thrilled, to start living this new world. Still, yes, in your organization, you have this hundreds of projects going on. And we know projects are not really agile in a way because they have assigned budget, right? Assigned expectations, some deadlines typically. So how do you manage that legacy of a pre-agile organization when you're about to launch into this new space of adaptivity and agility?
That's something that changed along the way. So if I look at, let's say, Agfa as an employee, I was 16 years employee in the same company. That's where we did the transition from project to more product thinking, more in a gradual way, where we considered basically a project or a program became a reasonably sized item in our backlog, and that's it. From that moment on, it was just considered an item in the backlog. And it could be big, it could be small, and the more closer it gets to the real work being done, the smaller we start splitting it up in things and get stuff done. So this was the initial thing. We considered all of those things as an item in the backlog. It had its benefits, but also its negative disadvantages. So I still remember when I became part of the management group of more than 500 people and 5 sites in Europe. We started doing this on that level with all those people, and then the size becomes big. And then we consolidated all the so-called projects and programs that was initiated, kickstarted, approved. Not even the ones that were not approved. We were already having 800 items in a flat list Excel file, which was way too many to decently handle and work with. Today, to be honest, when I help organizations going more into product-centric structures and things like that, I tend to at least, or I try to, ignore project or program as much as I can. And we restart with a blank sheet as the product backlog and go from there instead. Having less of a, I would say, noise from the past thinking. And more with a focus to outcomes, real problems, and real customers, instead of we have a positive NPV, so let's do it. Like, for example, one of the other larger clients we transformed is a telco operator here in Belgium, and I can announce the name, Base Company. So when we transformed Base Company, they had a 25 headcount PMO office, so managing projects and budgets. What we did from the one backlog that we started to use from scratch, by the way, so really repopulated. If we look at the one backlog, there was a kind of an API, manual human API towards these project structures. The only thing that we helped and supported that PMO office with is having some IDs in the product backlog items, which was called enterprise backlog at Base Company, but anyhow, so having some IDs as a reference. And then every sprint, every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, there was a communication send out where project management consolidated that information towards their project structure. But the main attention point, I think this is important, the main focus point and attention went to the real sprint reviews and the real product backlog. So, and working product in that sense. So, which for me is a higher level of transparency, looking at a working product, where are we at, get the feedback, readjust and move on. That's a higher level of transparency than a report, than a budget report or a status report, or even a Kanban portfolio board by all means. It's, if we say, okay, the level of transparency and how far are we, where are we with something, then it's working software. I think it's well stated in the Agile Manifesto.
Okay. So what I'm learning from you, and I would like to paraphrase that, so you check whether I understand that properly, and then if our audience also understands that properly. So you're saying one approach would be just to populate the backlog with the projects, every project being just an item, but you can easily go to a very long backlog, and then basically you'll have to deal with that. Okay, another approach would be just to start with basically empty sheet, right? And populate it with impacts and outcomes. And I guess for that, you need to go beyond the projects or under the projects and really discover what was the need, right? What was the expected outcome of that project. And then you said a very interesting thing, that you had this organization with a very large PMO. So basically you didn't ditch the projects from the organization, but you built a fence kind of around your, let's say, adoption, right? Agile adoption or whatever you call it. And within that adoption, there was no idea of project. There would be a really clean incremental development, but then because the entire organization still wanted to have some kind of project reporting going on, that somebody would build those reports. But it was not a concern of yours being a coach in that new structure. Is that true?
The concern was limited to how do we make sure this PMO office gets sufficient and good enough data so that they can do their job. the main thing is that financial controlling, for example, in the larger organization was also based on this project management methodologies and applications. So MS Project files, SAP, and things like that. So changing all of that and having financial controlling and related audits in the dark would be too much of a stretch. So we made sure that this could be going on in the old structure, so kind of a translation in that sense, while inside we mainly focused indeed on decent incremental development based on a good vision strategy, and then going from there. By the way, this was temporary because I think 1 year and 8 months after this change in the organization, the PMO office got dismantled. Well, actually not got dismantled them themselves, because we found other ways to make sure that the financial controlling and financial audits could be happening with a decent CAPEX, OPEX split and all that things, so that the report and the activities that were happening in this PMO office became less relevant to the organization. So those people were, in this PMO office felt undervalued at a certain moment in time. Why? Because all the attention went to working product, and for financial controlling, we found another way. So nobody was taking really their reports or their things that serious anymore. Right. And that's the benefit of redirecting attention. So at that moment in time, some of the project managers basically went into the development teams in certain areas. But there was still, for example, there's like in this company, there was interaction ongoing with Ericsson as a big vendor of telco systems. So this requires some kind of project management-alike skills, but this is handled in the teams. So some of them went really and became a team member, just like anybody else, and operated inside teams. Some of them were replaced into more of the business side of the organization, even though the business was included. But a telco operator, for example, they have their own brand of mobile subscriptions they sell. But on top of their network, they also sell white labeled, so other brands. And the other brands are still managed by lots of projects and programs. So some of them went in there and to use their skills. And others were so attached to their title of project management that we helped them find another job somewhere else.
Okay. So let's go back to our initial question, right? How do you deal with requirement management? So we've cleaned up this fog a little bit about the projects and non-projects. Okay, we understand now that you should isolate yourself from the legacy of the entire organization and probably try to start with an empty sheet and think about the impact and the outcome. Okay, let's assume you've done that and you have pretty big items appearing on that backlog, right? And you have 5, 10, maybe more teams that actually require it or need to work somewhat together on those items because those items are pretty big. So how do you go from those items that I define, I guess, as impacts or goals down to the items that the teams are comfortable sprinting on? What is the process, Jurgen, that you currently use with your clients to make that happen?
Well, the process is different according to the client and the context of the product, market, and organization, of course. To me, there's quite a significant difference between a B2B environment and a B2C environment, for example, hardware with software or software only. So all of that things play a part. But there are some standard patterns, and I think the one pattern to rule them all out is the Toyota improvement kata. I think this is where people need to think of. So the big thing is the challenge. So, I'm pretty sure, Alexi, you're familiar with the Toyota improvement kata. Say yes.
Yes, I say yes.
So it starts with having a goal or a challenge, which could be anything. In my case, I prefer to have it as a big problem statement or a big outcome we want to achieve. So this would be the challenge. Yeah.
I even have a book on my desk. Okay.
So if you understand the big challenge, then the first thing, and this is something I see people forget often, is to first examine the current situation. So the lean improvement culture said, challenge, where are we today? And this is even for product. What do we have already in our current products? What do competition have in their products? What are current workarounds that are being applied by potential clients? So getting the current situation cleared out is tremendously useful, at least to my current experience. So if we focus a bit on what is currently being done and available in that context and clear this one out, then it becomes a lot more transparent and apparent what would be the next target condition, which is the third step in your Toyota improvement kata. Understanding challenge, understanding current situation, define the next step forward. In my case, the next step forward would be a smaller part which we can hopefully or easily achieve in a single sprint with 5, 6, 7 teams. So, and this is different. If it's a one team situation, to be honest, a one team in a large product, they cannot achieve that much. It's a small change, and then you don't get that much effect. But if you have 4 or 5 teams, let's say 8 people, 5 teams, 8 people, that's 40 people. If they work in a 2-week sprint, that's 400 man days. In 400 man days, you can do a significant thing towards the challenge that you have set forward. You can make a significant next step. So this would be my next thing to define. And from there on, if we understand this one, then there's so much clarity in the group of people working together that it's peanuts to distill the backlog items that they can then use in their later on in sprint planning or within the sprint, and to get stuff done and also coordinate amongst the different teams if required and needed.